Welcome to Young Adult Book Fest at Listowel Writers Week. It's strange not to have an audience, to say the least. So, Sarah, I'm not going to do you a big intro because I don't really want to have you sit through a list of accolades where I intro you to yourself only. Is that okay with you?
Yeah, that's fine.
Good stuff. We've done lots of these events, both when you were the Children's Laureate, and I've seen you before and since then doing all sorts of bits, and I always love it, and there's always something fresh to come out of it. So I want to start not by listing the brilliant things that you've done and the lots of awards that you've won, and there are many, but by asking you what you're most proud of so far in your writing career to date.
There's lots of little things. I find the word proud difficult because it sort of implies ego somehow, and it's very difficult to have those feelings because there's so much work still to do, and so much of it is based on other people's work, you know, people working behind the scenes and publishers and things like that. So, but I would say, you know, becoming laureate, the 5th Laureate Ná was, it's so emotional for me, and I felt that the work that I was allowed to do and the team that I was given to help me do that work was just phenomenal, and the kids that we reached, it felt like I was doing something important. And having left teaching, sometimes you feel you're working in this little bubble at home and you don't know how that's having an impact on the wider world, you know? So that's what I'm probably proudest of, and I also feel kind of proud that I'm still doing it, that I'm still kicking around. It's not easy to finish a book and to keep doing it, and every time I hear that he's finished a book, whether it's published or not published, I think you should be proud of yourself, because it takes endurance. You know, I'm trying to do loads of running, and I don't have endurance. I don't have the stamina but I have the stamina to sit at a desk. But it is that kind of thing. It's like, right, I've run 20 minutes, like, when can I stop, when can I stop, when can I stop? And that is the feeling when you're writing. It's like, when will this be over, when will it be over? So just finishing every book always feels like an accomplishment.
That I can sympathize with. Not the writing books, but the running, absolutely. The when will it be over is very much my mantra. But I think you have to be proud of these things and celebrate them. And, you know, we're going to have a big young audience watching this. And that's an important takeaway for anybody, that whatever those little achievements are, whether it's personally or creatively along the way, I think we have to be allowed to celebrate them and not to have that thing that says, oh, this is my ego. Like, you've done an amazing thing. I have your books lined up over here by way of display, and you've added to that since as well with a new book for grown-ups. But going back to Laureate and those couple of years, maybe just tell us a bit about some of the highlights of that and what it was for anyone who might not know about Laureate Ná.
So Laureate Ná celebrates children's fiction in Ireland, and the laureate is chosen for various reasons, but we have the opportunity to come up with a project, and poetry has been close to my heart, and the reaction to verse novels was tricky at first. People weren't quite sure what to make of it, and going into schools and speaking to young people all the time, there is still this resistance to poetry, especially post sort of age 12. And I wanted to address that a little bit. I wanted to talk about that. So I wanted to celebrate poetry, but also say it's okay to not enjoy it. It's okay to feel afraid of it. And where can we go from here? And well, first of all, why do you feel this way? And we had the same answers across the country, which was that it's examined, it feels difficult, it doesn't belong to us. And so from that, we said, okay, so we are the poets. We're just going to proclaim that. And that was interesting because I had to start by saying I was a poet, and I had never really allowed myself to use that term before. So that was interesting, beginning to the project. And I wanted to work particularly with teens because they get a bit lost. And I've worked with teens in schools for a long time, and I was a teacher for 10 years. And teenagers look like adults, but they still want to be invited back into things. They still, and teenagers more than anyone are willing to try new things. If you say to a teenager, look, just try this, they kind of go, all right, I'll give it a go, more than anyone else. So I wanted to invite teenagers back and say, look, we haven't forgotten about you, because the focus is often on little uns when it comes to children's literature. And so that was really important to me as well, is that we don't lose a huge group where we could drag them back just before they're about to head into adulthood and decide that they hate poetry forever. And I think that we did that for many kids, and we reached a huge range, and we were working with children in cities and across the country, loads of different places. And from working with young people who were quite accomplished by the end with their poetry, and really achieving amazing things and being mentored by professionals, to also working with children who had special educational needs, and for them accessing poetry was about reciting nursery rhymes, and that was great, because we are the poets, we are the poets, we are the poets. Doesn't matter at which level you're accessing it. So I felt proud of all of those young people for giving it a try. Really, it wasn't about kind of the level of achievement. It was like, well, where did you begin and where did you end, as opposed to like, some people were beginning here and ending here. So it was about the progress, and it was phenomenal to be a part of that and to watch those young people grow, really.
It was amazing, and such a joyful project as well, to take that onus off people to allow them to enjoy it, and not to be examined at the end of it, and not to have it as a subject, and not to have it as the curriculum. And that's hard, I guess, in one way, because you have been a teacher, or had been a teacher, for quite a long time, so you've got to sympathize with the people who are in the classroom and teaching the curriculum. But I'm wondering, if you had all the power in the world to make up your own school system, so you are starting the Sarah Crossan School for Brilliant Literature in the morning, what does that look like? So what are you teaching, and how are you doing it? Is there something that you could take away from school as it is now that you think would turn out some young men and women at the other end of it who would say, yeah, I love to read poetry, I'm a writer, that's great?
I just think it's joy. I think that there's so much pressure on teachers to do paperwork and to just do a million things. I know that because I have worked within a state system, and I also worked within a private system, and sort of the pressure, especially within state systems, on teachers who go into it for all the right reasons, but are completely burnt out. So it's just exhaustion and trying to do everything, all these balls in the air, and of course lots of dropping. But I made a decision as a teacher, kind of about 5 years into teaching, which was, all I will attempt to do in this lesson is want children to come into the room. I want the children to want to come into my room. And once you achieve that, once the young people want to come into the room, you create people who love to learn, because that's why they know they're coming in. And so let's create joy around learning. And I think so much of it is about sort of performance driven, not understanding that performance is related to joy and emotion. So we remember the things that we love. Everybody remembers the day their children were born. Everybody remembers the day they were picked on by another child, because emotion creates memory. And so to focus on that within schools, that can we create memory through creating joy and happiness within a room, and not about what you can't do, but what you can do. So when it comes to poetry, not all the words you don't understand, but what is it you loved about this piece of work? And I see that with my daughter. I've just moved her schools, not just in September, she moved schools, and she was at a school which was very traditional and very rigid, and was a lot of worksheets and fill it in and don't talk. And she comes home now and she's absolutely exhausted. She's got dark rings under her eyes. She's all like kind of buzzing, but also about to fall over. And it's just fun all day. It's fun, and they're outside when they can be, and they're standing on their chairs. I don't know about health and safety, and whether they've looked into that, but it's just, she just comes out and says, it was so fun, and she wants to go back the next day. And so I think that it's just joy, always joy. And it doesn't mean that the reading in itself needs to be happy, needs to be, it needs to have a particular tone or theme, but just the way in which you introduce it to a person this is something that will nourish your soul, not something that will, get you into Trinity in 6 years, because 12-year-old doesn't care about that. So yeah.
My daughter's in infants, and I can attest to that because it's a play-based curriculum. So she too is exhausted by the amount of play that they're doing, but her teacher is playing her Yellow Submarine on the guitar, and they're learning new rhymes and poems, and she's so tired she can't tell them to us at the end of the day. But they come out in dribs and drabs when she has that little bit of energy, and she's loving showcasing them. So I'm completely with you on that, on the joy. And but what are your absolute must reads? Just a handful of interesting things, either that in the school of Sarah Crossan the kids are reading, or, you know, people's Christmas lists. If you've got a best friend, maybe consider buying them a book this year. If you've got a Christmas list and your folks are going to get you one, maybe consider putting a couple of these books on it.
Gosh, there are just so many. I love, if it's picture books, I love Tom Percival, and I love what he is doing with issues. They don't feel like issue books. So Ruby's Worry, Perfectly Norman. I'm not going to remember all of them now, but I can see the covers.
Yeah.
So I really think for picture books, Tom Percival is doing a fantastic job. I'm a big fan of Deirdre Sullivan, so I would pick up any of her books. I don't know. I think it's a difficult one because there's no right book for everyone. It's about the right book for the right reader, and I think the right book will find you. So I think that's why librarians are so important and booksellers are so important, is that you can go in and say, I like adventure stories, or I like stories that make me cry, or I like poetry, or I like comics, or I don't think there's one thing for everyone. It doesn't fit all. But I'm a massive fan of, you know, obviously the verse novel, which I think is really accessible for reluctant readers. I'm a big fan of graphic novels, of anything, of non-fiction. There's so much great non-fiction as well out at the moment. So I think it's difficult to narrow it down to a few, but those are kind of a couple of writers who I tend to pick up whatever it is they write.
You're right. There's no one size fits all. And I think verse novels is such an interesting thing because we often hear that they're so accessible for reluctant readers. And I was going to ask if that bothered you at all, that they're kind of seen maybe not as easy reads, but that we've developed this narrative of saying, oh, verse novels are really simple. You can read that in an afternoon. Is there anything in that, given the level of work that goes in to making these beautiful books, that bugs you?
Yeah, no, actually, because everyone that responds to them, to me personally, is overjoyed that they have been able to read it so quickly and they feel so successful. And there will be often readers who will read it a second, a third, a fourth time, and through those readings will come to understand more and more about the book and about the characters, and they will see I think it's Ben Stiller, I can't remember what film it is, but he says it's layered, it was made that way. Slightly arrogant, but you know, that they come to see the different layers, and I think there is this misconception that if it's accessible, it's not literary. And I think we saw that, if we're talking about sort of adult fiction, we saw that with someone like Sally Rooney, where it was, well, it's so simple to read and I understood all of it, that it therefore can't be that highbrow. And it took people a really long time to accept Sally Rooney as an author of literary weight and value. So I think there's nothing wrong with something being accessible. And you know, I love a quick read. I love going to the theatre and seeing a one act and not having ice cream in the middle or being distracted by the world around me. I can read a verse novel in the time my daughter's at school, so I don't have to be disturbed by her. So yeah, I don't think accessibility means easy for the writer, but I hope it's easy for the reader. There's nothing better for me than a reader saying it was easy and I flew through it. Like, how exciting. I'm delighted by that.
Yeah, and sometimes that they fly through it and then go right back to the start because they consumed it like that. It's that sort of binge reading, and then you want to go right back to the start and take in all the little details that are woven into it. And oftentimes I find with your work, Sarah, there are little mirror poems or little refrains that appear right through the work. And in something like Toffee, there are these tiny poems that are so extraordinarily powerful. And one of the ones that I always go back to, who did that to your face? She asks. And then on the opposite page, no one did anything to me, I tell her. And that's something that repeats itself a couple of times. And can you talk to us about, say, your editorial process when you're writing a verse novel? Are you a post-it note planner with bits and pieces of your plot everywhere? Or are you winging it right through and then doing all your editing at the end?
It's a really higgledy-piggledy process where I will be doing, always I'm in another project when I start a book, because that's the way of things. It's much more exciting to be focused on something that is in the future, and not in our present. I'm not good at the meditative state of the present. So what I'll do is I'll be reading, and in the back of most books that I'm reading I haven't got it in the back of this book actually because I've only just started it, but I'll sort of have notes. So I'll read a chapter and think, oh, okay, and then I'll write a note in that. So I'll have about 10 or 20 novels with notes, and I'll have to sort of do a scavenger hunt and look for all these books that I was reading, and type up those, and there'll be a poem written on the back of a napkin, and there'll be a poem written in 4 or 5 different notebooks, and some then on my computer, some in my phone. And then I say, okay, so I've got some ideas, and then I'll get started, and I'll write between 3 to 4 times the number of poems, and then I'll whittle it down until I've got the story I want, and then I have the gaps in the story, and then I'll fill the gaps in that story. So it is a really time-consuming process, but it's a fun process because I begin in a very haphazard way, and that means I don't know where it's going or what's going to happen. And I work really closely with my editor at Bloomsbury, and she's amazing. So for Toffee, actually, it was the first novel I ever submitted without an ending. So I was just like, I don't know. I don't know what happens. Here you go. And Zoe and I met for a cup of tea when you were allowed to sort of meet whoever you wanted. And we talked through it for a few hours. And by the end, I had kind of come up with it. And it's sort of through that process of talking with someone who knows the work intimately that you're able to sort of find where it needs to go. So I'm really lucky to have an editor who can be part of that process, not just doing it all by myself. Yeah.
Do you find that those books that you read where your notes are when you're thinking of your next book, do you find that the feeling of those books worms its way in there somewhere? Because I'd love to see the patchwork that formed the things that you make and the influences on something like Toffee.
Definitely. And I think, like, if I'm reading poetry collections, the poems tend to be very poetic and melodic and focus heavily on language. But if I'm reading prose, it might just be I have an idea of a setting, or I think we're all magpies in life, but writers especially are magpies. It's like, well, I'll thieve that idea and I'll take a little piece from that. So yeah, there's lots of bits and pieces from lots of things. And some of them are nods where I'm trying to nod to something else. I can't think of an example now. I'll probably think of one in a minute. Oh, obviously Apple and Rain, which is not a verse novel, but there's specific references to works throughout that. And I was kind of referencing the teaching that I had done and that in there. So yeah, I don't think I would even be able to work out the patch. I don't think I do. I just know that when it's a standalone poem and it's very sort of beautiful in terms of the language, if any of them are, that it's usually in the back of a poetry collection.
Well, they very much are. And do you find yourself ever breaking up things for dramatic effect or sticking things together because they feel like they go together? Because I always wonder with those very minute poems that are so punchy and really sort of hit you and make you go, oh, I need to just put this down and think about it for a minute. Is that a line that's come out? How do you know how something sits by itself and where it sits on the page? Because it's quite an unusual looking thing when you encounter a verse novel.
I think that with the poems that are very mini poems, those tend to just come and they are as they are. But but a lot of poems are an amalgam of several poems, because through the editing process, you say, well, I've said that before. Where have I said that before? I've said that there. And then so I might take 2 or 3 poems and just find the best bits in those poems and squish those together and get rid of a lot of it. So yeah, there is a lot of squishing, because there's obviously a lot of repetition takes place, because you're not sure what you're saying or who these people are or why they're doing what they're doing at the beginning. You're just kind of feeling your way in the dark, and then by the end you know the journey they have to take. So that's the part where you do the crafting. So I don't know, I'm always a little suspicious of authors who say, I just wrote it and it just came like that. I'm like, where's the crafting? Like, you've got to sort of pull it apart and put it back together. And I think that's why books are accessible or not accessible, because it is about the author going back and say, right, I've done it for myself. Now this is for the reader. This doesn't become about me anymore. This becomes about accessibility and the reader being part of this journey, not just me kind of arrogantly writing these,
or getting it out and being finished.
Stream of consciousness. Yeah.
I remember when you wrote One, and none of us knew yet what one was, and you kept having to say, I wrote a book called One, O-N-E, and spelling it out. And like before Grace and Tippett came into our lives, I thought, oh, this sounds really interesting. And you wrote it in prose and then had to stop and throw that away and write it in verse again. And I think if I were still in school, that would horrify me, because there's always the appeal of being done. And I think the editing process is an interesting thing, because if you are writing something for school or for an essay, you don't have the time to do that and play with it. And maybe that's where the joy of messing with the language comes in. But do you think you'll ever go back to prose, or do you think the ideas that come to you are going to dictate their form?
Yeah, I don't know. It's hard to say. There's some prose novels. Actually, I just picked up a novel that I'm reading. It's Jenny Offill, and that's prose, but it's very short prose, really sort of tiny paragraphs, and I like that. But then I think, well, it's very close to it's very close to what I'm doing anyway, so it's not much of a change. But yeah, I mean, that happened with one. I think it was only 30,000 words in prose that I threw away. But with Moonrise, it was 87,000 words that I threw away. And that was super painful, because I started in verse and went, you know what, let me try this in prose. Wrote 87,000 words, sent it to my editor, and she said, no, I don't think so. Sweet days. And then I started again in verse. But I mean, I've done some early readers with Nicola Coulton, who's an Irish writer and illustrator, and that's been really fun to write in prose, and I've really enjoyed that process. So yeah, I might go back to it. I guess it depends on the book, whether the voice lends itself to verse or to prose. But what I love about verse is I can miss out all those boring bits, and I can just write the scenes I want to write and not have to link those scenes so meticulously in the way that I have done when I've written things like Apple and Rain and Breathe. And I find that slightly tedious in process, and I want to enjoy my process more than anything else. That's what brings me joy, is process. It can't be anything else, because nothing else kind of nourishes you in the same way.
You talked about running, and I'm sure that's one of the things that nourishes you in terms of just getting your head out of the writing for a little break. But do you have any other, I guess, routines when you're writing, or things that you feel feed the work outside of the work itself?
Well, I say running, it's a shuffle. It's what's called a painful shuffle. And some days no shuffling at all. I don't know. I think lockdown has been really hard. I don't even know what my routines are anymore. Now that my daughter is back at school, I'm trying very hard to create routine in my own life, but I'm trying on catch up. There's so much catch up that I haven't got there yet. I'm editing a book at the moment, and I'm just saying to myself, try and do an hour a day. Now that's unheard of before. I was doing 4-6 hours of editing a day, and it wasn't a problem, but I'm it's like kind of wading through treacle. And I don't know why that is. I think it's simply the practice. It's like anything, you need to practice and use those muscles, otherwise you go a bit limp. So but I don't want to be around anybody else. I want to be by myself. I think that being a writer is difficult because you have to ostracize yourself in some ways from people, and it's what we're doing naturally anyway. So it's the last thing I want to do. If I have an opportunity to meet somebody or to take a phone call, I'll do it, because that social connection means so much to me now. So I think it's just one thing I say to young people is that writing is like anything else. It is practice, and you have to make certain sacrifices if it's the thing you want to do. So if your friends say, do you want to come to the cinema, or do you want to, then I think in the same way that if you've made the commitment to someone else to do something, if you've made the commitment to yourself to write, then do it. Like, can be as committed to yourself and your own desires and your own hopes and dreams and aspirations as you are to other people, and respectful to them. So I'm very respectful of other people. If I say I'll meet somebody, I do, but I'm not always respectful of what I have decided for myself is important to me. And so I think I always sort of say that to young people, whatever it is that you've decided, if you've made a commitment to spend 20 minutes practicing your tennis, or I don't know, reading something about science because that's what you want to do it, because you deserve to commit some time to yourself, and don't feel guilty that you're letting somebody else down. You've made a commitment to yourself, and that's just as important.
And our lives have changed so drastically now that actually we're all at home so much more anyway, as you say. And I think that's an interesting thing. I wonder, are we going to see lots more young writers coming through who've been scribbling away through lockdown? And Have you anything that you would say to young writers in terms of their confidence and just keeping going, and, you know, that moment where you call yourself a writer, getting to that point?
You know, I always refer back to an interview that I did. I think it was CBI. I think it was post the awards one year, and Aoife Murray was interviewing myself and Louise O'Neill, and it was in front of, I think it was Aoife, and we were in front of lots of young people, and I don't know what the question was. It was, oh, why did you think you become a writer? Or how did you become a writer? It's one of those things. And I said, well, I never thought I could become a writer because, you know, why me? Like, why would it be me? And I had such low confidence. I didn't come from the literati. I didn't feel I came from the kind of school or place where writers came from. And Louise was kind of horrified. She turned to me and she said, I never thought that. I always think, why not me? Like, why not me? And it had, you know, in that moment, Louise sort of changed my life. I don't know about the audience, but I just thought, oh, she's right. Why not me? What is it so special about other people that means that they get to do the thing they love to do? So I always tell that story to young people. It's like, you can make a choice. You can either say to yourself, well, why me? Or well, why not me? And I think why not me perhaps provokes a bit more action than, well, why me? You know, if you think why not me, you'll do the work to get there because you think it's possible that you can. So why not you?
I love that. Why not you finishing your next 10K run, mini marathon?
Oh no, not that.
We won't have a Q&A to finish us out, Sarah, with having no audience, but you have done so many events for young people that I'm going to ask you, what's probably the most interesting question, or one of the most interesting questions that you've been asked? Something a little bit out of the ordinary. Where do you get your ideas and how much money do you make?
Oh goodness, I don't know. I think the question that you just asked, and you know, I'm sorry it's not a young person, but I think that idea of it being, well, you know, is its accessibility mean that it's offensive somehow because it's not difficult enough? I think that's a really interesting question that I'm not asked very often. But I think one thing that I take away from young people is that they don't want to be left behind, that they are, once you offer something to young people, they will say, okay, give me more, like let me try that. So that's just what's exciting about doing events with young people, is their enthusiasm. And I you know, I have friends who say, I don't know how you can go and talk to 300 young people, you know, teenagers. They are terrifying. I'm like, they are the sweetest group that you can talk to, and you sort of just need 5 minutes to say, look, I'm not here to do a number on you. I know you hate poems. Just give me a few minutes of your time, and I promise I'll make you laugh, and then you can go away. And you don't have to buy a book. You don't have to do anything. Just like hear me out for a bit. And they do respond really warmly and gently. And that's what I love about the work that I do, is getting to continue to meet young people, because I was a teacher for 10 years and I miss it so much, those relationships. And it's hard to build relationship in 20 minutes or an hour or however long you get with these audiences. But you'll often get young people coming up at the end and telling you about their lives or their hopes and dreams. And oftentimes it's not to do with books. It's to do with other things. But that's really exciting, to be able to be given a window into these private lives of teenagers who, I don't know, feel safe in the world that you've created in that room. So yeah, I don't know about a question, but I just think teenagers are brilliant, and and I really miss them. I miss not being able to connect with them. I haven't done a school event in such a long time, or a face-to-face event in such a long time, and it's difficult. I find it sort of emotionally difficult and psychologically taxing to be writing for young people and not to have that connection with them at the moment. So I hope to get back.
Will end. Yeah, well, all we have to do is keep looking forward and hoping that we're doing all the right things to get artists back in front of live audiences again. In lieu of live audience, I've got a quick fire round. 4 last very short questions for you, Sarah. What's the best song or album that you've listened to recently?
Hamilton. I'm just constantly listening to Hamilton. Hamilton. Every day of the week.
Very late to the Hamilton party, but I couldn't agree more. I'm going to put the soundtrack on after we get off. What are you reading right now?
I'm reading Jenny Offill's Department of Speculation. It's an adult novel. And what is by daughter reading. I'm not going to remember the name of the book, but I'm reading something with her and it's gone out of my head. Oh, but we've just finished Pizzazz by Sophie Henn, which was fabulous. She really, really loved that. I'm doing that, but I can't do that because that's the climax. You realise what that means. If you read it, you'll realise what that means by the end.
Okay, we're going to have to pick that one up. And in our house, we're reading Fizzy and Bandit and very much enjoying it. Last movie you saw?
Oh, gosh. I think it was ages ago. Do you know what? It was probably Frozen 2. I think it was probably Frozen 2. I think I've seen it 4 times though now, which I don't think I enjoyed it more every time. Then the last film I watched for myself, it was Jojo Rabbit, I think.
Do you recommend?
Yes, it was great. Yeah, it was great. Really
Better than Frozen 2. And lastly, a book that you're looking forward to reading soon.
Ooh. I keep forgetting the titles of things. It just won the International Booker, and I've got it in my room there, and I can't remember. I feel like I need to. Oh no, I've got it there, but I can't see it. Is it The Desolation of Loneliness or something like that? I can't remember, but it's in that bag there. I have to go and get it. You're going to have to just have a blank screen for a second, because I have to go and find it.
We'll do the outro while Sarah's doing her.
I'm not going to find it. It's not in this bag. Oh, crap.
Well, that can be the research job.
But you know what? I've just bought this as well, so I'll show you this one instead. It's called Transfer Window. And one of the reasons I really like it is because look how much space it has on the page.
Beautiful.
It's translation from the Dutch. So that looks quite good. So I'm trying to read more in translation. That's my goal for September to September. It's the academic year. I still follow the academic year. I haven't been a teacher.
It's long built in. Sarah, that's so brilliant. Thank you so much for talking to me. Thank you for anyone who has tuned in via Listowel Writers Week. And hopefully we'll get to do this again in person sometime soon.
Definitely. Thank you, Elaina.